Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hear the campus bells tolling, which tells me it is noon here in beautiful Grand Forks, North Dakota. Thank you for joining the very first Dean Symposium focused on artificial intelligence. And I'm so pleased to welcome two wonderful individuals who graciously agreed to share with us their thinking and their work in these areas. So first and foremost, I'm very pleased to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Ian O'Byrne, who is an associate professor of literacy education at the College of Charleston in South Carolina. His research focuses on the dispositions and literacy practices of individuals as they read, write, and communicate in online or hybrid spaces. Ian's written many articles, and one of my favorite things that he does as a blog, you can Google him and find his blog, his newsletter, and all the ways in which that he communicates, shares, and has conversation in public spaces allowed so that we all can learn from one another related to digital spaces. Important to note that Ian comes originally from the University of Connecticut and studied in that digital media lab with some of the best thinkers in the world related to digital literacy. Our respondent today is Lincoln Hughes, joining us from Microsoft. And Lincoln has spent 5 years or so at Microsoft, and before that served also as a classroom teacher. He is motivated by a complex challenge of scaling solutions that prepare students for the 21st century, predominantly related to those in underserved populations. And I love the idea of Lincoln responding to Ian because there are so many areas in which their work crosses over. So I'm so pleased to welcome Ian O'Byrne, former Divergent winner and an affiliate of the Initiative for Literacy in a Digital Age. So Ian, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Dean Whitty. Thank you to the University of North Dakota for allowing me to come in and speak to you about this important topic. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'll take time to, we'll have Julie and Lincoln jump in, and I know that the Dean will jump in as well with questions along the way. We'll try and figure out ways to have a space so that you all can respond and let us know what you're thinking and feeling as well. One of my hope in this is that as I interact with technology and think about digital literacy in our lives, we always have advancement and we have questions about what this is doing to society. And my fear is that many times when we have technology change society, we have people that their lives are disrupted or they're dislocated. But to some extent, we continue to move on with AI. One of the things that we're seeing, or at least I'm seeing, is a lot of like hyperbole and hysteria. So we're going to try and talk today about what artificial intelligence and AI might mean for us. I think we need to have a lot of dialogue about what it means in our lives, and more importantly, what it means in the lives of our youth. And my hope is to have discussion and dialogue about some of these important topics. We'll try and stay away from discussions about Skynet and everything else happening, but we'll try and stay between the lines. So if you're in, welcome. There's a lot going on in the world. We're thankful for you being here. Please go into the chat and see if it runs for you. Please let us know where you're tuning in from and let us know how you're feeling about AI. we'll try and make sure that we can hear from you and know what's going on in your world. So I will begin with a piece by Isaac Asimov, just thinking about um, making decisions about AI. We have to think about where a lot of these models came from and what the models are actually doing, and think about what this might be able to do for us and do for the world and do for and how this might modify the ways that we interact with others. And so I begin with a social summary. We have the potential through these tools, as with all tools in teaching and learning, to personalize learning, automate assessment, enhance collaboration. We have the opportunity to change thinking, learning, teaching, assessment, evaluation. And so, where we're headed during this brief time point is how might AI shape education and youth development? And then, how can we better prepare students to thrive with AI? So, a question about not just surviving and not just succeeding, but surviving in current and future contexts. So one of the things I wanted to ask in the chat, and we can see if it's working for people, is what do you hope to gain from this? So I will start with Dean Whitty. Dean Whitty, my illustrious colleague, what do you hope that we talk about today?
Well, it looks like the chat is enabled, but it's showing disabled for folks. So we may have a strange situation here where folks cannot actually chat or put in the question. But hopefully we can just pivot, as they say on Friends, and go with the flow. So what do I hope to gain is just an opportunity to have a conversation about what does the year 2024 and 2025 look like from an AI perspective, especially as we're working with young people? And what skill sets do we need to make sure that we're equipping young people to use? And what do we need to know as adults to be prepared to do that?
Mhm. Thank you for that. Lincoln, what are you hoping to gain from our talk today?
I'm hoping to gain some clarity. I guess one thing that keeps me up at night right now is like this death by 1,000 pilots sort of idea that I see across mostly university systems, which I focus on, but also K-12 districts where they can as well. And getting really granular about like, okay, like if this tool is so powerful, here's a problem that's super specific and focused. How does it help with that specific problem? Sometimes it's a little verbose with its impact. So getting really, really pointy, really specific about what problems we should focus on solving and how to measure the effectiveness of that solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I was involved in doing some development with AI, and it's really interesting because as we'll see in a minute, like a lot of the tools are finely tuned and they're hyper specific for a certain use case. What we're seeing with human beings being human is that they're using tools for purposes that they're not really made for. Um, but it one of the areas that I think we might move into is that you might have an AI assistant that is like uh, you know is your guide that will say, okay, here's what you're trying to do. Now we'll point you in the direction of the specific models or tools that might be able to help you get that done. We might head to, and I think that we will head to some interesting spaces. Julie, does your mic work?
Yes, my mic does work.
All right, Julie, you're the most important voice on this call. What do you hope to gain from this?
Repeat the question. I apologize.
What do you hope to gain from our time together?
Um, I mean, I use, I guess, AI for, Chat GPT specifically for things like to improve, right? Like writing an email or something like that. So I'm just kind of curious to know what you guys see from the academic perspective on how it's affecting, you know, our classes and our students and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Jennifer Dale, I think you've been getting the golden ticket. Are you able to ask us, tell us what you're thinking and wondering about here?
Yes, Ian. I'm here to support my buddy Ian, but
Oh, wait.
also as somebody who works with faculty in a very large department of English, there's a lot of panic and disparate points of view around AI and the latitude that different faculty want to give students with it. And we're trying to create space that is flexible enough to support all faculty with whichever stance they may choose to take.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of hyperbole and hysteria that's going on right now. In education, there is many of us are very troubled. I think that some of this is we're privileging one form of learning over others, and one way of knowing over others. But I think that you know, when we built our systems based upon standard academic English writing samples, or the ability to speak and read and write in standard academic English and GPAs and stuff like that. And now we have models that can recreate that in 30 seconds or less than that. So we have a lot of questions that we should be talking about. So let's talk a little bit about what is generative AI, to get a better understanding of how we got here. One of the things to understand is that AI, machine learning, has been in our lives for some time. This is, you know, ChatGPT is about 2 years old. It was, released into our lives 2 holiday seasons ago, so we're coming up on 2 years. But machine learning has been impacting our lives for some time. We've seen early models in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But most recently, I would say that machine learning has been informing your Google results, your Netflix queue, your Amazon purchases. We have been using models. We've been studying data points that you leave behind as you're interacting online and trying to better give you results. Now, I would argue that the fact that we can interact with these models and bots and machines is an empowering opportunity, because now we can sort of really leverage it for our purposes. So AI refers to technology that enables machines to perform tasks that usually would require human intelligence. Many of these are problem solving and decision making. Many of the models that we're using and playing with now, like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, are text based models. We would refer to that as an LLM, or a large language model. Machine learning is a type of AI where computers learn from data and improve performance without needing detailed instructions. We can dive into different types of machine learning, just the same way that we would study teaching and learning with little human beings in our classrooms or with colleagues of ours. We also have a lot of models, not models is not the term I want to use, a lot of ways to differentiate one form of machine learning over others. And most importantly for our discussion here, my focus is always on generative AI. If we do one thing, I would hope that we would move away from discussions of just ChatGPT does this or AI does that. The really interesting piece now is that we're thinking about generative AI models, artificial intelligence models that can create new things. And so if we have one thing happen today, if we start thinking about and using the term generative AI, we've done a good job today. There's a lot of generative AI tools that are out there. Most of us have played with text generators. We have used ChatGPT. Microsoft Copilot is baked into a lot of the Office products, and Microsoft is opening that up to institutions that use Microsoft products. If you're a Google environment, then you'll have Google Gemini baked in. One of my favorite LLMs, one of my favorite text generators is Claude AI by Anthropic. We also see image generation and audio generation. So with image generation, we have tools like Dolly and Midjourney that you can add text and it will spit out a image. We had the same things starting up with video generation. So you can, I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about what Steven Spielberg would have created and what Star Wars would have looked like if we had generative AI earlier on. But we had the ability to give a piece of text and it will give us an image or give us a video. We have a lot of LLMs for computer code. One of the most interesting things that I have seen lately is tools like Copilot in GitHub, where I can have a coding environment where I'm trying to create a video game or create an app or make sense of data, and I can have a guide on the side that will tell me how to interact with the code and what to use. So you might not be an expert in HTML coding or Python, but there really is the opportunity to have dialogue almost like with a programming whiz that will tell you how to interact with that code. So we're moving to a space and we're pretty much there where you, me, students can say, I want to create a video game about these types of characters, and it runs on mobile. And within a couple keystrokes, they can get a working prototype of a video game up and running. And then also audio generation is incredible right now. You can feel free to strip out the audio from this or some of my podcasts or other places online and create videos and audios of me and my nasal voice and my self-deprecating tone for use for your own purposes. One of the best ways that I have been thinking, one of the most inspiring ways that I've been thinking about generative AI is from Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI. Definitely recommend it. And basically, Crawford tries to make the case that the best way to view AI and generative AI is the way that we would think about an atlas, that we are getting a general lay of the land, we're getting a general understanding. When I was growing up, I had those maps in my classroom that showed the Soviet Union or Russia as gigantic and red and sitting over top of the United States. And so if we look at AI and generative AI as a little bit of creativity, a little bit of politics, a little bit of subjective tone, it might be a little bit better of a way to understand some of the texts and the materials that these generative models are sending us. We can talk a lot about some of the wonderful books that are out there that can help you build up background knowledge on machine learning and AI, but I would definitely recommend Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford. I want to pause for a minute, and some of my colleagues that are here in the panel and able to chat or able to unmute, what are some of the tools that you are currently using in your work? What gets you excited? What things can I steal?
I might come back to the second question first, but one thing I
Yeah,
think
go
it's
for it.
interesting as like couple points, and actually, Jennifer, you inspired me to say this. Like, as we see these things developing, both from like a very technical standpoint or more practical, tactical standpoint, the importance of language, like it's almost like we glossed over it, right? It's like the importance of language and currently right now English, written, verbal, is so important, right? Like it is a force function here where like, yeah, I might not be able to, I'm not a data scientist, but if I can articulate what I want a large data set to do in academic English, I can be a data scientist. It's in my pocket. And like that, the countless examples are there. But I want to encourage you, Jennifer, keep fighting that good fight with those English faculty. And they're concerned because they are totally wizards in this world that is being created. And the second thing, it's kind of a definition thing back a slide, but don't scoot backwards, is there's large language models, which is what what grabbed the headlines in the newspaper, like, wow, it's like the internet in a data set, and it's like these huge, multi-billion point parameters, which is like, all of Wikipedia into these large language models. There's also a really helpful way to think about it. There's also small language models. So if you take, 12 textbooks, that is something that could like, fit on like a smartwatch. Like, and you could have that, and like, let's say, and this isn't true, but you say like the world's leading 12 biology textbooks, and you're like, if I can have that stored on a, watch, what could that do for like emergency medical situations? And you could, I just think of like things like that too. So both the depth and breadth of what Ian's talking about is very exciting to me. And I want to give some credibility to, like, it doesn't have to be like this, world. I like the Atlas example, but think of like less of an Atlas example for these small language models, but more of like a small rural town, and being like, there's still value in knowing those streets and who lives there and like all that comes in it. And there's just really interesting case studies because wherever the data can live in those small language models, and this is largely Apple's kind of perspective on this, like if we can get them small enough on a device, whether it be a smartphone, Apple, something future that sits in your glasses, whatever. There's some really powerful use cases that come out of that as well. So just keep fighting the good fight, Jennifer. And the power of smaller data sets is still applicable in generative AI as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about technology, there's often this mindset that everything has to be high def and immersive audio and 360 and technology can be a powerful tool when we use it and we limit and we focus what we're working on. Another two more points. One, we are in a space where, once again, that standard academic English or the English language is, privileged. It's used heavily in a lot of this because, if you think about it, we scraped Wikipedia and the Google book search, and we scraped Reddit, and we created these models, and we said, okay, we want you to look for, Apple images, and we want you to look for like examples of different recipes or whatever. And so it's looking at, for the most part, English language. And we realize that the world is incredibly diverse and it is multilingual. And so we have to ask questions about what this means as we go forward. What does a multilingual environment look like in the context of generative AI? In addition, for the educators in the room, we want to think about there is the opportunity to take in your class all of your lectures, all of your PowerPoints, all of the readings that you give to students, and put it into one model. And then the students that are struggling, we used to have this 400 years ago, we had this thing called Google Custom Search Engine. But now we can have that on steroids where you can give all the materials to one model and then students can have dialogue with that model and it will just search and pull materials. That bot, that agent will pull materials just from the materials that you gave to students. Okay. And you can say, all right, I want 1 degree of separation or 2, but there's a lot of power involved in that. Other voices, either tools you're using or questions that you have up to this point.
I had a comment come through on my phone. So we're pivoting, right? So my number is in the chat if you want to send me a comment. But Bridget Brooks is an instructional designer here at UND, and she said one thing that really excites her about the use of AI here at the university is that we have studied what it can do, and we have faculty experimenting with AI assignments. And those assignments are peer reviewed and also available in the Scholarly Commons from the Chester Fritz Library. And this was the work of Anna Kinney and Ann Kelsch as well. And they're also working in TADA, which is our teaching excellence wing, to train faculty on the AI that is embedded in our learning management system. That's the Blackboard Ultra as well. So I'll put the link to the Commons in the chat.
That's awesome. One of the questions that we've had especially in higher ed over the last year and a half, 2 years that ChatGPT has entered our parlance is a decision that we need to make in higher ed about, do we allow students to and faculty to use generative AI, or do we try and force it out and ban it? One of the things that we're recognizing, especially overseas, in international context, is that widens and it creates a different digital divide, where we're going to see a difference in students and graduates that have experience with and know how to use generative AI and machine learning tools, and those that do not. And to some extent, they'll be behind. We're not preparing them for the future that they'll go live and work in. So I'll push forward a little bit here. As we think about teaching, learning, and education, some of the things that we could and should be thinking and talking about is what teaching, learning, and assessment looks like in our lives. We need more opportunities to have critical thinking skills. We need more focus on ethics in this. The topic of ethics is going to be one of those cross-cutting themes as we have this dialogue, as we think about what these technologies mean in our lives. I just referenced it a minute ago. We need to find opportunities to start to integrate generative AI and machine learning tools into our classes. As an example, one of the things I do with my pre-service teachers as I'm preparing them to go out in their middle school and high school classrooms, I have them take their ideas for a lesson plan that they want to go teach in the classroom and give it to a generative model, give it to ChatGPT or Claude, and ask it to create a lesson plan for them. And then, in the lesson plan, it says that there's a PowerPoint associated with it and worksheets. And I ask it for the PowerPoint worksheets, and it spits those out. And then what I do is I have the students in my classes recreate that same process with 2 or 3 different models or engines, and then come back to class and talk about, okay, when we think about theoretical perspectives of teaching and learning, which one of these models makes the most sense? Which one of these bots did the best job in helping us prepare for the classroom? And then also looking at that PowerPoint, looking at the worksheets and figuring out what makes the most sense here. And as we know, there is a fine line between being able to create really good lesson plans and unit plans and plans for instruction, and then being able to walk into that classroom and make it come alive, online or off. And so there's the opportunity to help build that skill set in educators while still pushing pause and preparing them to interact with human beings. We might be getting to the space where we can help people prepare for teaching and learning by teaching bots, but we'll say that for another day. So also, as I referenced before, I think if we don't give students opportunities and we don't give faculty opportunities to play with generative AI and try and figure out what these tools mean in their workflow and focus on process, not just product, then we're creating a new digital divide that once again we hamstring people as they go out into their futures. So some of the things that we often talk about in terms of pros and cons in this, we have an opportunity to create highly personalized learning. We have the opportunity to automate repetitive tasks. Those of us that get those frequent emails that are asking us where things live in our learning management system, these are really helpful for us. There's the opportunity to spark creativity. There is the opportunity to support accessibility, enhance collaboration, provide immediate feedback. One of the best uses of generative AI that I've found recently is given to me by administrators in the local school district that said that they use the tools to get a better emotionally intelligent tone to emails when they send it out to colleagues for tasks. And so I've been using that a lot more often, trying to figure out, usually I'll talk to my partner, who is my HR manager, and ask her how to best send out an email so that I don't sound passive aggressive or don't sound bossy. But now there's the opportunity that for those of you that can't use my partner for that task, you can use a generative tool to put that in and say, how's the best way that I should send this or word this email? Some of the barriers, we've heard a lot about hallucinations and inaccurate information. A lot of this is changing, but when ChatGPT came out and a lot of these generative models came out, it would try to guess what the next word or next phrase or next piece of the response would be. And so it would make up information. It would tell you resources that don't exist. And so there was a lot of buzz around hallucinations. One of the things to keep in mind is that the initial models, when ChatGPT came out, ChatGPT is version 3.5 of a model from OpenAI. And so when it first came out, ChatGPT was created because OpenAI decided they were preparing to launch GPT-4. And then they decided that just on a whim, pretty much as an accident, that they needed a way for a playground for the model to live within. so that it could get a lot of questions, a lot of ill-formed questions, a lot of different languages, a lot of nonsensical questions, so it could learn as it tried to create and generate new things. And so, almost as an accident, OpenAI decided to take an old model, GPT 3.5, and release it as ChatGPT. And so, all of that meaning to say that a lot of the initial models would not actively search the internet. So as it was telling you stuff to find online, it didn't know because it couldn't look. That is changing. We also need to understand that, as was referenced before, we a lot of the initial models were created using information that was scraped from Google Books or Reddit or Wikipedia or elsewhere, and so some of the bias and the hate and the misogyny and racism and all the stuff that we sometimes find online was scraped up and put into these models. And so we can talk a little bit about equitable algorithmic justice. We can talk a little bit about surveillance and surveillance capitalism, but we need to understand that a lot of that there is bias in these models. One of the challenges that we have is folks that want to be over reliant on use of AI. We talked about the digital divide. One of my key concerns that I talked about previously, and I hope that we'll talk about today, is data and data privacy. And then the risk of plagiarism is one of those things that we often struggle with as we think about bringing this into our lives in our classrooms. In my work, I think about, as I said before, not just my pre-service teachers, but I think about the students that my students will teach. And I also think about my two children. So I think about my fourth grader and my ninth grader. And I envision a world where they can grow up and they can learn along with a guide on the side, a digital co-pilot, a digital muse. And so I dream of a world where my fourth grader, she can, as she's learning math now, as she's reading and building reading comprehension skills, as she's making connections in content, I dream of a world where there is an agent, a model, an AI bot that can learn along with her. So as she continues to learn and struggles with new and novel concepts, the model, the bot can prepare for that and say, hey, you're struggling right now with like algebra, but this relates to something that you learned last year in school, and you can make that connection that way. And the model or the bot knows all of the stuff that she has created and read and learned along the way, so she has that guide on the side. So there is the opportunity for real-time feedback. Some of the really cool models or tools that are out there that do a really good job, in my opinion, with real-time feedback and accessibility is Conmigo from Khan Academy is amazing. Definitely worth paying for. But then there's also the opportunity to have a little bit of facilitated collaboration and then streamlining that learning process so that that guide on the side can identify areas where that learner might struggle, or learners in your class may have struggled in the past, and provide a little bit of guidance along the way. For the colleagues of mine that are here and can chat, what are some of the things that you're seeing in teaching and learning as you integrate generative AI? People can unmute or just put in the chat.
I believe the chat is working now, and thanks
All
to
right, what
Chad
do we
and
got?
the wizards behind the curtain. So thank you. So feel free to use the chat if you can.
So what pros and cons do you all see as you think about integrating generative AI, integrating these tools into learning context? Yeah, bias and fact checking. The piece about, I mean, the fact checking is, um, you know, Dean Whitty talked about how I worked at the New Lit Lab and we looked at online reading comprehension. My dissertation was focused on critical evaluation of online information. We had this really new and novel idea that you would use. We had a thing back in the day called Google, where you put keywords into and you would search for answers. And there was this incredible thing that happened, that there was only individual pages of Google, and you'd go to the second page. I know this sounds bizarre. And if something was beyond the first page, that it really never existed. And we would teach students and teach teachers how to use different search engines and different keywords, and you would try and figure out, okay, as I look at individual pieces of information, is this credible? Is it relevant? Is this useful? Is it truthful to me? And that is hard work. And we see through the Stanford labs and elsewhere that many people don't critically evaluate online information. And so now we have big questions about, what do we do when we had this autonomous bot agent entity that is talking to us and sharing information as if it were a human? Does that raise or lower our expectations?
On that topic,
Yeah, of
even
course.
without going too far into the history of Google, but looking like forward and just right around the corner on some of these things. I read recently, because one of a startup I'm with is looking to tackle like the problem of doing research, especially let's say high school are doing research and going to Google, and the first 3 pages are all either sponsored and or created by synthetic sources. And we found something. It's in his pitch deck, and I couldn't find it exactly on my screen. But it was something crazy. Like by 2026, like 60% of content on the internet will be synthetically created. And just like that, obviously terrifies me from a learning standpoint, let alone like a civic standpoint as well, of just being able to say like, well, that tool is a tool that we all, it's a verb and a noun, use every day, and a lot of our students will use it without thinking twice about it. And his had just like, there needs to be a platform that is somewhat peer reviewed by third party sources, where these sources of truth, peer reviewed periodicals that follow a certain level of journalism standards, where that can live. So that really like sacred process of trying to search for something or solve a new problem is being done with information that can be trusted. And kind of, this is about generative AI, but kind of trusted through not using generative AI and coming as close as you can from a pure human supply chain output.
Cory Doctorow has a post about this, and I won't tell you the title of the post because it's bad words, and I don't want Dean Whitty to judge me. But there's also this and Doctorow is basically talking about how there is a lot of that crud that's online now. And then also, I would agree with you. I feel like, I pay attention to not just what happens with teaching and learning when we integrate technology, but I also think about my research practices. And over the last 2-3 years, Google's gotten really bad. You are seeing a lot of ads in there and sponsored posts, and Google is a lot of the internet has become unintelligible for most people. And so we don't know the secret sauce. We don't know the algorithms that make ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude do what it does. But we definitely don't know, or Facebook serve you up content, but we do not know a lot of the algorithms that are having Google pump out the search engine results. There is, if you look at online retailers or online publishers, 2-bit bloggers like me, there are question marks about, why is Google privileging some information over others? And so my search practices changed, where I would have a search term and then add in like Reddit to the end, because I was trying to inject some human feedback onto the responses I was getting. So in a way, I was creating like a chat GPT version of this. Other voices, what are you thinking about what this means? Anna, are we allowed to unmute Anna and have her ask that? Do we have the technology to do this? No. Julie, can you please read Anna's question for us?
Can I read a question?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Anna, go for it.
Hi. Yeah. So I'm really privileged. I run the writing program here at UND. So I've been thinking about this a lot and working with folks as they think about where AI fits into their work. And so one of the guiding principles, I think, of our writing program and writing centers, which is part of it, is thinking about the relationship between writer and audience and who we are communicating with and for what purposes we're doing that. And I don't think any of those navigating that rhetorical context, I don't think excludes generative AI, but I do think it asks us to make sure that we're prioritizing the connection and relationship that we have between writer and audience as being central in the rhetorical decisions that we make and the effectiveness of those decisions when we think about writers. And so one of the ways I've been communicating that is reminding people that I really believe that human readers deserve human writers and human writers deserve human readers.
That is wonderful. I will come back to some of these ideas in a minute. The idea of audience, one of the tools that I was helping develop 2 summers ago was a way to create digital agents or bots and give them a personality or a mindset or bias and privilege and perspective so that as you write to them, you could get an understanding of how that type of person might respond. So you could like write to a bot and get feedback on that before you wrote to the real person, if that makes sense. Lincoln, did you want to respond because this was in response to your comment?
Yeah, I mean it shapes actually like the way Anna you described it better than my cliche, but like writing is thinking and being able to um, fake that in some way, which is human nature. And if I was 18 years old and I'm like, I could go sleep for 8 hours, or I could like try to write this paper for 4 hours, which one am I going to pick? I can tell you with a large degree of confidence what I would go do right now. And so, like, being able to understand reality for our students and what we want them to do, and like the friction and kind of like the appropriate struggle that we want them to have, is being able to, like, how do we create those environments doing, and this is very like small like use case I know of the larger thing because there's so much more to talk about in this space, but I think like the writing piece to it in particular is super important to think about in kind of a microcosm, because then it's like, okay, like do we, when we like when the price of content creation is virtually zero, through, and it's getting better every day of modalities of how that looks, how do we create learning environments that allow someone to like do the tough part about content creation, which is maybe the story arc, maybe the structure, maybe the whatever, and being able to use the tools to augment that so they can get to the part you're trying to learn, and offload the mundane parts of it that might be a part of the process too. And then I think a theme coming up here, I just want to say it out loud, is like one of the most exciting parts of like all this, I think, for an education standpoint, is this: the feedback loop is tighter, more personal, and can push a student forward. So instead of grading, let's say 30 papers or something like a middle school teacher might do, you're able to do that, offer appropriate feedback to the student, and be able to push them further. And the AI can, like today, the AI can do all that. And this, like, you want to still be the co-pilot, the pilot in the seat, and the co-pilot does some of the mundane work. And I think that's a really exciting part of it. But yeah, just respond to Anna. I feel like that would be a podcast that I would listen to all day, to try to flip through that question over and over again as this becomes more mainstream.
One of the other things is that here in South Carolina, we have a pretty robust CSPD, week and experience of computer science. In some of my research, I think about how do we integrate computer science and computational thinking into everyday teaching and learning and assessment and evaluation. And so I run a week workshop in the context of others on AI. And so this is higher ed folks, this is K-12 folks, and we need to, we make it very clear at the very beginning that I know as a K-12 educator, as someone in higher ed, you are overworked. Okay, you have too many jobs to do, and so we're not going to focus on. We need to, but we're not going to focus on like hacking your classroom, and we're not going to focus on, as Lincoln said, like you need more sleep. you need to find ways to charge your battery and rest. But we make it clear that yes, this is a way for you to like help you do a better job and focus on the things that are more important. I also really value the question that I think it was Anne had in there about how do we think about use of these tools. And so in dialogue I've had with people on this call, but also colleagues and friends, I would ask, okay, when a student was writing an essay in my class before AI, how did I really know that they were writing that? How did I know without a shadow of a doubt that they wrote that essay for me or answered that open response question? And then now, how do I know that they're doing it? And so it's having me think about what are ways that I can document process along the way and have students put out little guide points and breadcrumbs to show where they've been and where they've generated these ideas before I get to the product. And then I see the colleague in there, Raul. Raul and I and another colleague were talking about, what would it look like if we wrote a publication or did some research where we actively wrote along with a generative AI tool? What would that look like if we not just asked it to help us write an abstract or use Grammarly Pro to clean up my writing, but it was like a third or fourth researcher and writer and author in the room? What would that look like if we forced ourselves to really do that? So I think this is the third and fourth and fifth piece of these deans roundtables that we're doing to really document what could and should we do. So I always try to come back to guiding principles and first principles to think about what this might look like. So we have questions about bias and equity. We have questions about ethics, as I said before. When I think about what this means for learners, when I think about what this means for students that my students will ultimately teach or my children, the kids in my neighborhood, the first things first is I want students to play. When I talk about AI, I ask to find elementary classrooms, middle grades classrooms that a teacher will go in and just create space so that students can play with these tools and see what they can create. I want to identify the future Steven Spielbergs and figure out what sort of videos and movies they can create using these tools, what new and novel spaces we can identify. Critical thinking strategies, more talk and thinking about ethics. So that's having our learners, our students think about where did this come from and what am I doing with it? I talked about creativity. The balance with human skills in computer science, in machine learning, there is this field known as human in the loop computing. And so one of the things that we might think about is where is the human in the loop? Where is the human in the experience? And how can we identify ways that the human still does the human stuff and then the machines or the bots or the agents do what they do best? There is an opportunity for us to level the playing field using generative AI and ensure equitable access. I am a white cisgender male. I have a certain worldview. I have a certain amount of privilege and perspective. But my viewpoint is just one viewpoint. I have colleagues and friends and researchers and educators that live around the world that they view generative AI completely differently than I do. And they see no problem in using tools to help them do better work. There's an opportunity to foster adaptability and curiosity to help us be lifelong learners. And then also, as I said before, have that AI tool be the guide on the side of the co-pilot. So what's that mean for those of us that are in educational circles? I would say that as an institution, either K-12 or higher ed, we need to set clear rules. We need to understand what we can and could and should do when we integrate AI into our work process. In many of our learning situations in our environments, we already have rules for cheating. We have honor code violations and everything else. Once again, when we brought one-to-one laptops or mobile devices into our classrooms, we had an opportunity to think about what those meant. And so maybe we don't need new rules. We just need to expand the current rules. We need to take time and money and effort to train educators on where they can use these tools, where they can learn more, discuss the challenges, and collaborate. Work along with learners, work along with students to better understand what tools they're using and why. And then time, money, support, pay educators, pay people for their time, treat them like professionals so they can go play with these tools and technologies and figure out what they mean. I'm going to move on to the last piece of my puzzle and talk about what keeps me up at night. But I wanted to pause because I know that there are questions coming up through. So, Julie, do you see anything in the chat that we haven't addressed yet? Lincoln, anything to say? Anyone want to unmute and make a point?
I'll jump in on like when those guiding principles are in place, and this is lowercase c democratic encouragement of committees, formal, informal. They're, I'm sure, on your campus and on every campus. Like even if you're like, I'm intimidated by maybe some of these acronyms and maybe some of the components of this, there needs to be definitely on these committees from just, I'll say across the central region, R1 universities in the United States that I work with, like there is like a selection bias going on the committees making the principles and the guiding frameworks for campuses. And I think that's going to yield results that what the biases might just keep on trickling down. And the second thing I thought was really interesting, Ian, in your thing that I've heard of just like holding space for time for people to like work with it, play with it. And from a campus I work closely with is Indiana University out in Indiana, obviously. They have a pretty large, it's co-pilot, like proof of concept in academics. And it's just largely, it's like, yeah, there's some like, here's what prompts do, here's like use cases, here's how it might like make your life better. And like after like week 2 of doing this, the group just like took off like wildfire and people are telling me like what they're doing with it. And one thing that I think is a very non-technical problem that they use technology to solve is one of the people at School of Education actually took her transcripts from her like pandemic lecture recordings and use that. So they're like videos. They also had a transcript behind it. And that was the data set, and asking Copilot to use that data set to get more voices heard in her graduate courses. So like smaller setting, more conversation, but still it was like 80-20, 20% of the students were talking 80% of the time, and being able to say like, what things can I do in my teaching practice to make a more inclusive and diverse conversation? And it just like came back and she was like, it was safe. Like I didn't feel threatened with the feedback. It wasn't like someone was telling me I'm a good teacher or not a good teacher. And I thought that was just like profound to use like the data sets we have existing already to improve things that I wouldn't think top of mind, at least for my own biases, to go solve like an inclusivity and access problem. I know it's a little bit more of like, yes, AI in the hands of people trying to do good things yields really good results. But I thought that was, Ian, your comment about just like, kind of human capital, monetary capital, and time capital being thrown at this issue. I think when it happens, it just like really interesting things happen when people can play around with this in safe spaces that are they're not feeling judged of what they're using it for. I thought that was just like an awesome thing that I feel like every instructor I wish had the confidence and wherewithal to go do that for themselves.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead, Julie.
Oh, I was just going to say, we're just kind of mostly seeing some back and forth conversation in the chat. Just coming up with, different and more flexible and equitable frameworks for how things are being framed and things like that. It's just a lot of not questions, but back and forth chat right now.
So thank you for that. I'll go through these last couple things and then I will stop talking. And so this is some of the stuff that I really worry about as we think about this. I wonder what is the cost of all this. Most importantly, on the bottom of this is the environmental concerns. I live near one of the largest Google data centers on the planet. There is huge environmental concern with what's happening there. You know, in addition, one of the worldviews that we need to understand is that with machine learning, with AI, first of all, there is this belief. You have to have the assumption that everything in life is knowable, that there is a specific answer for everything. And if you don't feel that way, then if you can't explain everything about life, then you're going to have some challenges with machine learning. The computer, the bot, the agent is going to think that there is an answer for everything, and this is what the answer is. There is also a philosophy, there is a disposition within computer science, within machine learning, but really computer science, that we can use these technologies so that we can go do more important things. So things that are boring, repetitive, monotonous, committee work and stuff like that, hypothetically, those aren't boring at all. But that we should do more important things that charge our batteries. And so that means that we're taking those like menial tasks and we're sending it elsewhere. So we have to ask what that means about society. We get into like universal basic income and discussions like that, but you want to think about what this really means philosophically. You know, that everything is has an answer, and it's in bold on the page, and then and in the index. And then certain jobs are menial or boring and stuff like that, and real work is harder thinking. And then what are the environmental concerns? We need to spend more time thinking and talking about ethics, but we also need to talk about data literacy. You need to know that as you're using ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot or Gemini or any of these tools, that, as I said before, OpenAI created that playground for ChatGPT to exist in, because it needs to interact and learn from you. So as you use these tools, the tool is learning from you and from your interactions and your questions, and it's learning about you, but also it's improving. So there are anti-plagiarism tools that I'm not going to talk about on this because I'm not going to talk about on this, but there are anti-plagiarism tools that are marking themselves as being very high quality in terms of like identifying kids that are cheating. But really what it's doing is it's learning from all the data we're paying them to look at, and it's increasing market share. And so as you use these tools, your data is helping inform it. You know, it went from Wikipedia and Reddit and book searches to you. So just understand that. And then the last piece I'll end on is this has came up before with our discussion about writing. I definitely recommend online. There's a maker manager schedule post by old Google employee that basically said that as human beings, you know, most of our schedules are focused on managing time and going to meetings and stuff like that. But we really need to schedule time for us to be a maker and create. And with generative AI, we might be moving to a space where instead of us taking time just to imagine and be creative and be thoughtful, instead what we're doing is we're offloading that to some bot or agent that's telling us 3 or 4 ways to be creative. And so in that interaction, I'm wondering, you know, who is the creator there? Who is the one that's regurgitating stuff? And so the things that really make us human, we're not creating space in our lives to be human. So I'll stop with that. And what questions do we have? Lincoln, go for it.
Oh, it might have passed a little bit, but I love the adage, even though it's imperfect, of if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And I think that's true. I mean, it's like I think originally came from Facebook, but it's very true in these, and like different companies have different standards of customer data protection. And I think it's really important for you all to know that from your personal self, for the students you are entrusted with, and as voices in the community, for your institution. Like, do you want to partner with organizations who are using your data, who may be selling your data, who may be storing your data in countries that have different ideals of how personal protection should be held? And I think those are questions you should be asking your leadership if they're not being asked already. and I will like kind of leave it at that. But I think that that question, however small, is really important, because if you're not reading the fine print and how fast these things are moving, likely no one is. And just being able to say, like, what is our, data protection strategy? Am I able to put personal information in these tools that you're giving us? And might be surprised with the answers, or hopefully pleasantly unsurprised, depending on that. And to wrap things up on this, I think one thing I'm really excited about for you all, is just the ability to empower end users. I mean, you're self-selecting to be at this talk today. I hope you're not forced to be here. And the ability for creative, I'd say more like liberally educated humans with these tools is absolutely just a force of nature. So I encourage you all, for wherever you're at in this journey, to keep pushing yourself on it, share it with others, because I think it's really exciting, and like what's around the corner is even, for me, more exciting. But it all becomes more powerful in the hands of creative, well-intended people.
Well, that seems like a really good place for us to wrap up for today. We apologize for the chat issues early on, and thank you again for all the folks behind the scenes that were able to get that to work for us. And for those of you that jumped on as panelists or allowed me to move you over to panelists so we could start some momentum in a conversation, I appreciate that also. Um, let's give a virtual round of applause for Ian and for Lincoln. Thank you so much for coming in. There's some other Divergent winners that jumped in. Thank you. Lots of faculty here. Thank you so much for giving your time. We look forward to seeing you again, chat working next time, we promise, to continue this conversation. Special thanks to Julie Wrighton, who's on the call, my right hand. Appreciate it. Thank you all, and have a great day.